Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Holy Quran in Surah 28, Ayah 5, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ونريد أن نمن على الذين استضعفوا في الأرض ونجعلهم أئمة ونجعلهم الوارثين. And we wish to show favor upon those who are oppressed on the earth and to make them leaders and to make them the inheritors. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim. Brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Imam Ali alayhi salam says in reference to this ayah in Nahj al-Balagha that those who are oppressed or those who have been shown deemed weak refers to the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Therefore, when we take into consideration these words from Imam Ali alayhi salam, we start to see that this ayah alludes to two things. First, the divine right ordained upon our infallible imams by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as leaders amongst mankind. And second, that they will that those that will inherit is a clear reference to our 12th Imam, Imam al-Mahdi ajalullah ta'ala Fawajh al-Sharif. However, this does not give us a clear and complete understanding of the role of Imams in both religion and politics. It still leaves many questions unanswered. For instance, what does the leadership entail? And in reference to the Imam in occultation, what do we do while we await for his reappearance? In fact, Imam Hussein alayhi salam in his tragedy of Karbala, in his struggle, in his strife, in his jihad, was clear about how his revolt was not to secure khilafah and direct political gains. When he says, إِنِّي لَمْ أَخْرُجْ أَشْرًا وَلَا بَطِرًا وَلَا ظَالِمًا وَلَا مُفْسِدًا وَإِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي. What does this mean? I did not rise out of desire or arrogance, or to transgress or to corrupt, but rather I rose up to demand reform in the ummah of my grandfather. Ummah, he uses this term ummah, and he's very specific and clear about it. He did not say khilafah or kingdom, or allude to anything that's political in nature. His task was to reform us, Muslims, mankind, everyone, as individuals. And even if we don't agree with this and say that the role of the Imams, no, was political, he was fighting to get power from Yazid, then we need to ask ourselves, while our 12th Imam is in occultation, do we remain without any form of governance, which goes hand in hand with Islam? If we say that Islam is complete and continuous religion, what does it say about politics? What does it say about how to deal with our lives today? To answer this question, inshallah, we will first examine the role of prophethood and imamah in relation to the rest of mankind. What was it, the job of prophets and the imams? And then we will look into the ideas of political Islam and Islam in politics. صلى على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Therefore, it's evident when examining the lives of our imams, we realize that their actions differed from one another. For instance, you have Imam Hassan alayhi salam, who concluded a peace with Muawiyah, whereas on the other hand, you have Imam Hussein, who rose up to fight against Yazid. On the one hand, you have Imam Sajjad, who dedicated most of his life to worship and acts of prayer, whereas Imam al-Baqir, on the other hand, devoted most of his time to spreading knowledge and academia. So all their actions were different. Maybe this might give us an insight into the changing circumstances of their times. The Imams lived through different caliphs, through different crises and issues, so they had to adapt. However, if we take a general and total view of the life of our Imams, we will find a deep harmony between all their actions. In short, we start to appreciate that their efforts to preserve the Islamic character of society, to protect the correct doctrines, and to see that deviation did not grow to the extent of threatening the ideology itself. That's why Imam Hussein says ummah, and he says reform. These words were very specific. He wasn't there to just impose something, he was there to change character, he was there to reform us. The message of Islam might have been completed by the Holy Prophet, but this message still needed protecting. That's why our Imams are infallible. They had a divine duty. That's why they couldn't make mistakes, because their job was still ordained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah told Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama, by the way, which is imam as a stage further after prophethood. Not all prophets are imams. Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama. Ibrahim told him, what about my descendants? Qala wa min dhurriyyati, what about people, all the other prophets? He said, La yanalu ahdi al-zalimin. Therefore, justice is really important. Allah said, my promise will not reach those who are unjust. Justice becomes a prerequisite for imam and prophethood. Why is this important? Because it is vital to appreciate that the imams did not secure the leadership of Muslims by chance. It wasn't because, all of a sudden the Imam was born and people loved him. No, nor was it for the reason that they were related to the Prophet. By the way, there's so many descendants of the Prophet and the Imams. Like for instance, Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam alone had 37 children. So you can imagine how many relatives of the Prophet there were. So it doesn't mean that these Imams were just because they were related to the Prophet, they were chosen and followed. In fact, there were so many relatives of the Prophet, like we said, but rather they earned this status through their interaction with and their service to the Muslim Ummah. That's why the Imam says, for the Ummah, I'm doing this for the people, I'm not doing this for my own gains. That's why Imam Musa al-Kadhim also tells Harun al-Rashid, which was the caliph of his time, the Abbasid caliph, he tells him, "O Harun, you may rule over the bodies of people, but I rule over their hearts." This is a clear reference to what? Free choice. We're the ones who choose the Imams. We choose to follow the Imams. We choose to love the Imams. Free choice is a God-given bounty, which is sacred. Thus we will be judged according to our actions, to the choices that we make, not those imposed upon us. We can't be forced and then be judged upon something. You have to make the decisions for yourself. We must choose to follow the Ahlul Bayt, and it's not enough to say that I was born a Muslim. We have to make that choice out through understanding, through logic, through appreciating what they say and to us. You cannot guide whoever you want, Allah says in the Quran, but Allah guides who He wishes to the straight path. It is not the duty of prophets, therefore, and Imams to judge us. It is their duty to help in our guidance. However, what is our role in this whole dynamic between the role of the Imam and the Prophet as a guide, as a leader in this sense, and us as people of the Ummah that the Imam describes? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam, He said to the angels, "Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa." I am placing on earth a deputy or a representative, however you may want to translate it. Many scholars would argue that this tafsir of this ayah refers to the notion that Adam was the first prophet, and therefore he is the Khalifa, the representative on earth. However, Ayatollah Muhammad Baraka argues that this isn't in reference to the fact that Prophet Adam was the first prophet, but rather that Allah created Adam as the first human being, as the first man. Therefore, by deducing this, what happens is that we, all of us as human beings, become the representatives of Allah on earth. This corresponds with the role of prophets that we just mentioned, and Imams as guides and protectors. It's not their job to rule over us directly, but they guide our actions, they guide our choices, our decisions, and help us to find the straight path for ourselves. This is reinforced by many references also in the Holy Quran, where the Prophet is told by Allah that your role is what? Shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadira. Your role is as a witness, as a bearer of good news, as an warner. Now we ask ourselves, how does this all relate to politics in Islam? By examining the role of the prophethood and imamah, we see that their task was not to directly gain control of political power, but rather they worked towards building and nurturing an Islamic ideology, and nurturing an Islamic doctrine, and addressing all aspects of life, including politics and governance. And whatever you want to think about, Islam has an answer for it. Trust me, there's no such thing when people say, you know what, Islam only deals with these issues, Islam doesn't really talk about this. There's everything, the Quran, the Hadith, the acts of the Ahlul Bayt address all aspects of life. We just have to know how to ask the right questions and look for the right answers. And just like we might choose our faith, we must be certain of it, also we must make the decision to choose our political system. And there are only two criteria for such a system which we've looked at. First is being freedom of choice. There must be freedom of choice. And the second is upholding the principles that were taught to us by the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Many would argue that during the occultation of our 12th Imam, there's no place for religion and politics, and vice versa. Because a lot of people argue, you know what, this is a new influx of religion and politics. And then people say, no, this is an influx of politics and religion. What's the difference? And they keep on arguing. However, what we have shown, inshallah, is that the Imam does not need to be present for us to be living under his guidance. Because the task of the Imams wasn't specific to their time, like we've already mentioned. It was a continuous message. Their role was just to keep it from deviating. And while the Imam is in occultation, the message remains, even though the Imam isn't present. And therefore, we have to follow their guidance in all aspects of life. So inshallah, we'll take the lessons that we learned from Arbaeen, from Imam Hussein, and from the tragedies of all our Imams and their struggles, to hopefully further our strive to find the right path, inshallah. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.